Alright everyone, welcome back to another video of Salesforce Makes Sense. This is Himanshu and we are continuing our journey of understanding Apex by use cases. This is use case 19, and for those of you who are following along and who are confident to solve this on your own, pause the video here, go ahead, execute this method and comment below your particular code snippet to tell me whether you were able to achieve this use case or not, right? For those of you who are working with me in terms of writing the code with me, let's start and let's understand what the use case is. So find the type of object based on the record ID provided, right? So normally whenever you're working on Apex methods, you'll be working with one or more records, right? Meaning you'd have record IDs. What are record IDs? Record IDs are basically nothing but a unique identifier, an 18-digit unique identifier that uniquely identifies a record in the system, right? What is your name? So you have a name, right? You have a first name, last name. You have an email address. You have a phone number. Collecting all of that makes you unique, right? One of you, right? There will not be multiple people like you, right? With the same name, email, and phone number. Similarly, in Salesforce, in the Salesforce database, each record gets this record ID, right? Which is a 15 or an 18-digit record ID, and that uniquely identifies each record. How do you find this record? If you go to, let's say, Salesforce and you open any random record, right? I'm just explaining this for people who might not know this. I know most of you already know what is record ID, but let's say I open an opportunity record. You see this here on the top is your URL, and this right here is the 18-digit record ID, which is how Salesforce stores this particular record and identifies that this record has to be opened. This is the unique ID, okay? And this is called record ID, right? Now, what happens is normally there are scenarios wherein you might not know what kind of object are you dealing with, right? For example, we talked about the what ID and the who ID, right? They can have multiple types of references, right? The who ID can have either a lead or it can have a contact. The what ID can have an account or an opportunity or a custom object. So if you were asked, take this particular task record ID and tell me what kind of object is linked in the what ID field. How would you do that? That's the use case here. Okay. So I'll just go into Visual Studio Code and I'll create my 19th use case. What do you call it? Apex class. So I'll say Apex use case 19, right? And here I'll just go ahead and say public static string check object type. Alright, I want to basically check what kind of object it is. What is it going to accept? It is going to accept an ID. So this will basically be the record ID of the record. Alright, I'll just go ahead and say return object type. And what is object type? Object type is nothing but a string variable which is initially defined as empty. Alright, so the template is ready, all good. And now what we can do is we can simply check what kind of this particular record ID is of type, meaning I want to tell the system back that, this is an account, this is a contact, this is an opportunity, this is a lead, this is a custom object. So that's what I need to return back. How do I do it is the question, right? What we have in our hand right now is the record ID, and I can tell you that when you have the record ID, you can simply use a method that's called getSObjectType. As simple as that. Okay. It's very straightforward, and this is what you can basically use. So this method is what will tell you the kind of object that this particular record ID belongs to. Very straightforward, very simple. Okay, I'll just go ahead and try to deploy it. So this says object type. Let's take a look. I wanted to show you something later, but let me just show it right now. So if you notice, when I say record ID dot getSObjectType, what you see is in this autocomplete, right? You see that this is coming from a class, which indeed is a part of another class. And what is that class? The top level class is called the Schema class, right? Remember we talked about Schema, that is basically how every metadata is configured in the system. So Salesforce provides you a class called Schema, and that Schema class is very powerful. And that basically is what tells you and gives you a lot of information about your metadata. Okay, like this right here is basically what we are trying to understand is the metadata, what kind of object it is. It is not data, right? It is metadata. So there is a Schema class. All right, the Schema class, if I show you on, let's say, the browser itself has a lot of classes inside it, meaning inner classes, and those classes also have methods. So we are trying to achieve this particular use case. Sorry to be scrolling around here. Yeah, so we are trying to use this particular method. What do you call it? The recordId dot get sObject type. This particular method right here. So if you notice, it is coming from a class called schema.sObject type. You see this right here? It's coming from a class called schema.sObject type, which is why it has a specific kind of a return type, meaning it is not just returning the kind of object, it is returning more information. Now more of that information is of a specific type. That's what we are going to look at. What is it basically? Okay, so I'll type schema class in Salesforce, and I'll open the Apex reference guide from the developer documentation from Salesforce. And here you'll see that these are all the schema methods. All right, now it is very important to identify which methods will work for you, because if you see, these are the top level methods that are available, and then you'll have to probably go inside and actually look into a specific method and then try to find something out, right? Because our use case is to find the type of, what do you call it, the type of object it is. So I'll just go ahead and try to read here. The get global describe returns a map of all sObject names to sObject tokens. Okay, fine. So if I open this particular, what do you call it? If I open this get global describe, it tells me that it will return a map, which is of a string comma schema.sObject type. Right? Do you see the sObject type showing up here, which is kind of what we want, right? The schema.sObject type, meaning which kind of object it is, what kind of sObject it is, what is the type of the sObject. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and try to use this syntax first instead of directly calling this method. Okay, so what will I do? I'll say schema dot get global describe. Okay, what is this going to return? We know this is going to return a map collection, and that map is nothing but a collection of all the sObjects. Okay, so what I can do, I can create a variable here. I'll just say global desk map is equal to schema dot get global describe. Sounds fine? Sounds fine. So what we'll do is I'll just try to show you what things show up in this particular map. So let's go ahead and say I want to print this particular map here. All right. And I'll say save, and I'll say deploy. This should be deployed first of all. Let's give it a try. Yeah, this is deployed fine. Apex use case 19 has been created, and all we are doing here is we are just calling the schema class, and we are saying whatever you have in your system, just describe that to us and show us. What does that mean? That means it would have a string as the key, and it will contain the type of object. Okay, what is a better way to be able to debug it? I can simply iterate over it because it is a collection. So I'll say for each string in global desk map dot key set, let's see what is in the value. I'll say system.debug global desk map dot get. Remember the map variables and the map methods. I'll say dot get each string. This will give me the value for each one of them. Okay, now what am I wanting to do? I don't want to print everything, because if I do, it will be a very long list. Let me just quickly show you. Let's try to deploy this. Deployed. Let's go back to our developer console. Let's refresh. Let's go back, copy the name of our Apex class. Let's open it, and that's our method class right here. I'll go ahead and say execute anonymous, paste the class name, paste the method name, and right now the ID is not required because we are not really doing anything with it, right? So I'll just put it empty for now. I just want to show you what the log looks like. So I'll just say execute and open log. So it says invalid ID. Oh, this should be an ID. So I'll just say, let's just do something. Let's copy this particular record ID. Okay. So it is not able to resolve an empty string as an ID, because ID is a different data type and a string is a different data type. So I'll just paste the ID here, and now it should be fine. Let's go ahead and say execute. Okay. So it executed fine. And if you take a look at the debug only logs, you see it is showing up all the sObject types. Right? It looks like a string, but this returned result is basically of type what? It is of type schema.sObject type. Make sense? All right. So if we have to actually check what kind of record ID, what kind of object is this particular record ID, we need to be working on this particular map, and we need to actually dig more into it and see how can we find that which record, the record ID that we have put, what object is it out of all of this list, right? Out of all of this list, this is the list of all the objects in Salesforce, every object. All right. So now we are inside the get global describe method, right? So this is where we have reached, meaning we have reached where we are getting a schema.sObjectType related information. So does that tell you that schema.sObjectType is another class, and this will basically have some methods in it as well, right? So if I take a look at this particular class in Salesforce and I open this documentation, so you see there's an sObjectType class, right? And we can actually leverage one of the methods from this particular sObjectType class. Okay, if I take a look at the methods here, you'll see that it tells you that it has probably 4 or 5 methods here, where you have something called get describe option. So if you see, it says get describe returns the describe sObject result for this field, meaning like whatever has been returned here, right? For example, the returned information here is of each object type. So let's say the object name is order. So if you go ahead and say order.get describe, it will give you all more information about that order object. Okay, if you want to take a look at this particular method, let's take a look. So if you see the get describe method, what does this return? This indeed returns a new class kind of a return type, schema.describe sObject result. Okay, so this is basically giving you more information about that particular sObject that you are just trying to fetch. Okay, and if you see, this is basically what is going to be returned. It will be returning a value which will be of data type schema.describe sObject result. Now what is this? This is another class inside the schema class, correct? Because you're able to understand, right? It is another static class inside the, schema class. All right. So what we can do, we can go to our code, and in our code, what we'll do is, let's go back to VS Code, and here, instead of printing everything, let's go ahead and say dot get describe. So now what will happen? Instead of printing what is that particular sObject type, I am saying for each sObject type, I want to see the description or more information about that particular object. Okay, so I'm just printing out this particular value. So this is going to return me this value one by one, and then using the method of this particular class, I'm saying get describe. Now let's see what does this return. I'll just go ahead and say deploy. Okay, this is deployed. I'll just go ahead and say execute, and let's see what is the log showing up now. Now you will notice that each object will have its own information, and that information is again vast. There's a lot of things for each object. You see, now it is returning a lot of information per object. See, per object, a lot of things are there. Like what is the record type info? What is the sObject description? Is it creatable or not? What is the record type ID? What kind of records are there? A lot of information is available. Okay. So we have reached the second level now. The second level. Correct? Now, if you take a look here, what is the return type of this particular method? It's schema.describe sObject result. Does that tell you that we can have some methods in this particular class as well? Yes, we can. So we need to dig again. We need to basically go to this particular class in Salesforce and take a look at the documentation in terms of what this offers as part of the methods. Why? Because we have reached the second level. First level was find all the sObject types. All right, we got all the sObject types. Now for each sObject, I want to find what is the description of each of one of them, all the characteristics about that object. That's what I found. Now I'm looking for something very specific, right? I want to basically see what kind of prefix, right? What kind of prefix that particular object's records start with. That is what I'll be able to use to figure out whether my record ID matches this same object or not. If this is a lot complicated, I understand. Take a look at this video once, take a look at it one more time, and that should resolve it. Because we are dealing with the schema class, and that has a lot of inner classes in it. Each inner class has its own methods. It's getting a bit complicated. Okay, so I understand that, but be with me. Let's see how it goes. So this is the describe sObject result class, right? And if you notice, this class also has some methods, right? You see these methods? So describe sObject result methods is nothing but for each object type, you get a list of methods or you get a set of methods which you can leverage or you can use. And interestingly, you'll see a method called getKeyPrefix, right? Now, why am I saying getKeyPrefix? Because I know that every object has a unique prefix. If you see, opportunities always start with 006. That is for sure. That's how Salesforce manages it. What about accounts? Accounts start with 001. Always, all the account records will start with 001. See, 001. What about contacts? It will be 003. Let's open contacts. See, 003. What about users? 005. So basically, each object has a designated prefix which is of 3 characters. 3 characters in the beginning. Alright, and that is exactly what we need to be able to understand whether the record ID that we have entered to the method and the prefix, the key prefix of the current object, if it is same, I can understand, oh, okay, this is the name of the object. Make sense? So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and use the getKeyPrefix method. And what is the getKeyPrefix returning? It is essentially returning a string, and that's what we need, right? So I'll go ahead here, and what I'll do here is I'll simply say string key prefix is equal to, and I can take all of this stuff here and I can put my getKeyPrefix method. Make sense? And I can simply print out the key prefix for all the objects because I am in a loop. Correct? Right? So let's deploy this. And let's take a look at the developer console and let's execute it one more time. And let's see what is now getting printed on the screen. Now it will basically print all the prefixes, which will basically be 3 digits. And if you see, a lot of them don't have any values which are null, but whatever have the value, there are 3 digits. Okay, so if you see, the getKeyPrefix is able to generate the first 3 digits for each sObject type that is part of this particular iteration. Make sense? Awesome. So you have that loop in your hand. You have all the key prefixes. Now what can you do? Can you check? Can you compare somehow whether your record ID begins with this key prefix? If it does, you know what kind of object is it. Correct? So if you understood what I'm trying to say, we'll basically say if record ID dot, I think we'll have to convert the record ID to a string. So what we'll do is we'll basically create a new variable. All right, I'll just say string rec ID, or let's simply typecast it by using a string method. So I can say if string dot value of record ID dot starts with key prefix system.debug. What do I want to debug here? I basically want to print the each string. Save. So what am I doing here? Let's first of all see if it compiles fine, but essentially what am I doing here? I have the record ID variable which is of type ID. I converted, or I typecasted it to a string variable so that I could compare one string with another. Correct? And I'm using a string function that's called starts with. We'll have to see whether this function exists or not. And if it does, it should be helpful for us to understand if my record ID starts with the same key prefix, that means I know that this is the object. Correct? Because this will only match one of the objects. It will not match all of them. So this for loop is running for, let's say, 1000 objects. Right? But the record ID is, let's say, 005 and something after it. So it will only match for the user object, and that is what I want to know. What is the type of the object? Correct? So let's try to deploy it first of all and see if it is compiling fine and getting deployed or not. Let's say deploy. It deployed fine. Let's take a look at the debug log. I'll just go ahead and say execute. So you see now my record ID is playing a part in the code. So this is 006. So essentially the debug log, okay, it says argument cannot be null. Why is that? It says argument cannot be null. So you're getting a null pointer exception, right? And I'm very smart to understand that because I've realized a mistake I have made. But take a moment, pause here and think about what could have gone wrong here and why am I getting a null pointer exception? What is a null pointer exception? A null pointer exception is when you're trying to basically use a value of something that does not exist. You're trying to refer it. And if you notice right on your screens, you see some of the prefixes are null. So if I say null dot contains, so it will fail, right? It will give me a null pointer exception. So I should be putting a check here. Okay. So I'll simply say if key prefix is not equal to null, only then go ahead and check this out, or else don't even bother. Make sense? And now it should not give me a null pointer. Why? I have the record ID, which is for sure here because I have put it on the method, but we can also do another best practice check that if record ID is not equal to null, only then perform all of this, or else don't even bother. Okay, but we should be good now. Let's try to deploy. This is deployed fine. Let's try to re-execute it and let's say execute. This time looks like it's executing. Yes, it has. And now it has generated a log, and for 006, if you notice, you're only getting the opportunity printed out, which is exactly what we needed, right? So it is able to print you the opportunity, but what is it printing? It is printing each string, and that's basically your opportunity type. So can we just simply say object type is equal to each string, and this is what it will return. That should do it. All right, so this should do it. Let's go ahead and try to execute it one more time. I'll just go ahead and say execute. Let's see what the method has returned. It has returned opportunity, and that is exactly what we needed. Let's go ahead and try to do something like 001. I know this is not a real ID. Let's try to mess with the system. Let's see what happens. The prefixes should be correct, right? So 001 is for account. See, it is printing account. What about user? Let's try to see if user record gets returned. I mean user object gets returned. Execute. 005. It should basically be user. You see, user. So your code is working smart enough to understand what kind of object it is. All right. Awesome. So I'll just go ahead and take you through the entire code one more time. We basically used the schema object and things just got a bit interesting after 18 use cases. We were doing a lot of easier ones, but this is something that's very important and that's very crucial to use in your day-to-day Apex calls, in your Apex development, because you'll need to do things like get the record type of ID of a record. Where do you get it from? You get it from the schema class. Get the S object types. Where do you get it from? Schema. You have to probably get pick list related information. What kind of values is it storing? What is the label? What is the API name of a pick list? Where do you get it from? You get it from the schema class. All right. So schema has a lot of potential in terms of giving you information about your entire metadata. So you cannot, just get away with it. So it's very important that you understand what we really did here. Okay. Quickly briefing it one more time. We started by looking at the schema class, and we got a method that said get global describe. So most of your work will basically revolve around the get global describe. You don't need to worry about the other methods for now. Okay. So schema.get global describe gives you a map of string comma each S object type. So for each string, I looped over the key set and I told the system for each S object type, give me the get describe information. What did get describe do? The get describe basically returned the entire information of that one particular object, and it returned it for all objects because I was running on a loop, right? So the get describe gave me the entire information, meaning all the possible information I could get per object. I got this information, and from all of that knowledge I wanted to use one specific method to see what is the key prefix for that particular object, and that is why I use the get key prefix method. Okay, and all of this together for my record gave me the opportunity or the user or the contact record ID, because I did a check here. If the key prefix that is currently on the loop right now is same as, or actually it's the starting of my record ID, that means that the current object in concern is my object. I can return that to my method. All right, so that was our use case number 19. I hope this was something that you are really looking forward to. And let's take a look at the next use case, which I believe is also on schema. So yeah, we will learn more about schema. If this was not 100% clear, if this was 50-60% clear, just let me know in the comments, no problem. I'll take the next use case and probably try to explain a bit more around it. All right, and for those of you who are able to figure it out on your own, that's amazing. And one more thing, it's not necessary that you know each of the classes, each of the methods by heart. You can always refer the documentation, copy paste that particular code here and see what is happening. It's more important that you know what you're copying. It's not like you cannot copy code from the documentation. The documentation is there for that. All right, cool. That was use case 19. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.